We got
Morgan
it!
Ellison.
Woo! Atta baby!
With rushing records being broken, winning records snapping, and a team getting their first win, this week has possibly become the best week of the XFL season so far, and we're only halfway through the season. Hey, how's it going? Thank you for clicking on today's video. If you enjoy what you see, like and subscribe, and if you want to see shorter clips of these videos, follow me on TikTok as well. So, let's talk about it. To kick off the week, we had a great game on Thursday Night Football between arguably the best team in the XFL in Houston traveling to play the hot Seattle Sea Dragons coming off of 2 straight wins. I'd say for most fans, this was the game of the week with the firepower these offenses have, especially with both teams possibly having the 2 best quarterbacks so far this season. With that being said, this was for sure a defensive game instead, actually, as both offenses were surprisingly struggling. I guess not so surprising for the Seattle Sea Dragons because Ben DiNucci seems to always keep the opposing team involved with his reckless picks. But for Houston, for the fact that they've been very consistent all season so far, it was super surprising to see them struggle for majority of the game. And I have to give Seattle's defense some credit because they were all over Brandon Silvers, making him throw many incompletions as well as sacking him 3 times, including a sack fumble. Seattle looked like their best on the 2 scoring drives in the second quarter, with Ben DiNucci making some huge plays in the air and on the ground, with the first touchdown being a long 20-yard scramble and run play for the score. And then the second one was another rollout scramble play, but Ben DiNucci would throw an absolute dimer to wide receiver Damian Lewis on a play action play. The special teams of Seattle would also get 2 block punts later in the second half in the game, which is wild for the special teams unit. After the second block punt, Ben would throw a bad pass to Josh Gordon, which turned into a pick by Ajeen Harris on the goal line. Ajeen would go on to have 2 picks in that game, with his second one coming later in the fourth quarter. After back-to-back fumble drives going into the fourth quarter, Houston would get the ball inside Seattle's 25 and would punch it in on the goal line to returning back Max Borghi, trying to get back into the game. Seattle would end up scoring late with 1:22 left in the game with a rush on the goal line themselves by Darius Bradwell, making the score 21-6. Houston would surprisingly pull a touchdown out of nowhere with a 47-yard bomb catch and run from Silvers to Justin Smith for a touchdown, trying to come back late. But Silvers would end up throwing a pick later to D lineman Nikolaos off a strip or a tipped ball from D end Elijah Ponder, who's had a great year defensively. Seattle would go on to win 21-14 and move up in the XFL North Division. Up next, we had the DC Defenders traveling from one hostile environment that favored them all the way to another hostile environment in St. Louis to play the Battlehawks for a second time in 3 weeks. After a defensive first quarter, St. Louis would score first with a field goal that should have been a touchdown drive if it wasn't for a holding penalty. DC would then respond the way they know how, by playing some physical football and knowing that no defense can stop it, with Abram Smith starting this all-time great game that he has with a 62-yard run to the end zone while breaking some tackles on the way. Then DC would get a pick off a great heads-up play by DB Monte Nicholson, recovering a fumble after a sack from Andre Mintz. Then they would run the ball to score again with a ground and pound for 5 yards with Abram Smith again, making the score 14-3 at halftime. After another field goal from St. Louis starting the second half, DC would then respond with another touchdown from Abram Smith, making their DBs look just silly out there and just outrunning the entire defense and everyone on the field for an even longer 70-yard touchdown, finishing off his day with 3 touchdowns and 2 of the longest plays in the XFL season so far. St. Louis would try to get back in the game, responding with a 5-yard touchdown from A.J. McCarron to George Campbell, but DC would start pulling away with a scramble run play from Derek King, running it in from 10 yards out, continuing his performance from last week, getting 2 rushing touchdowns. St. Louis would then respond with a bomb from A.J. McCarron to Steve Mitchell Jr. for 50 yards, getting his first reception of the day, trying to make a miracle like they've been able to do all season, basically. They had one drive left with a little over a minute left to try and tie the game, but AJ would end up throwing a pick to guess who? Safety Michael Davis, continuing his Defensive Player of the Year season, already having 4 picks, one behind Houston's Ajeen Harris. DC would go on to win a close one, 28-20, and is now the only team in the XFL that is undefeated. Ending the Saturday slate, we had probably my least anticipated game going into this weekend, but I was proven wrong with the shootout that ended up coming up in this game when I thought it would have been a low-scoring close one. Both quarterbacks were slinging it as Orlando subbed in third-string quarterback Quinton Dormandy after Paxton Lynch was struggling besides his first touchdown drive. Dormandy would then go on to basically take over the quarterback position for Orlando as he'd go 7 for 9 and 76 yards, including a 25-yard deep pass to Charleston Rambo, continuing from his performance last week, making the score 17-13 Vegas at half. Speaking of Vegas, the Vipers offense led by Luis Perez, continuing to start at the quarterback position, looked really good throwing the ball, starting off hot with a deep 35-yard pass to Jeff Badette for his first touchdown of the day. Lewis would score his second passing touchdown off of play action to a wide open tight end Sean Twice, as he would gwitty in the end zone. In the second half, the Vipers started running the ball more, especially in their first 2 drives as they marched down and ending both scoring drives with a ground and pound run on the goal line by running back Rod Smith. Orlando would keep fighting while Vegas was pounding the rock as the Guardians offense would score a pair of rushing touchdowns of their own with running backs Jahmaine Martin and Devin Darrington scoring for them. Vegas would try to end things with another Perez to Badette connection, getting Badette's second touchdown on the day for 25 yards, though Quinton Dormandy would try to save the day by scoring a big-time touchdown late in the fourth to Cody Latimer, who's been balling out all night for the 45-yard bomb. They'd sadly fail on the 3-point conversion, as well as failing on the 4th and 15 option, to then eventually lose to the Vipers as Vegas gets their first win of the season. Even though Orlando did lose, they might have something with the potential of Dormandy going into Week 6. To end Week 5 of the season, we had another Texas showdown on Sunday Night Football with the Renegades traveling over to play the San Antonio Brahmas. Both teams here are looking for wins as we are halfway through the season and getting closer to the playoffs. All in all, it was a very physical game with both offenses really struggling trying to move the ball down the field well and both defenses making some big turnovers. After Arlington scored first with a field goal, San Antonio would then score with a touchdown drive after picking off Kyle Slaughter. The Brahmas, with new starting quarterback this week, Reed Sinnott from San Diego, would march down the field and end with a great throw on the run to TJ Vosher for 6 yards. After a back-to-back field goal second quarter, the Brahmas looked really hot coming into the second half on their first drive, marching all the way down until Sinnott would throw a deep ball pick to the Renegades safety Joe Powell, getting his second pick of the season. With that opportunity, Arlington would rush the ball all the way down 98 yards on the drive to punch it in from 1 yard with Devian Smith, taking the lead 12-10 in the third. After that, in the fourth quarter, Jack Cohen would come back in the game after what seemed to be a Sinnott injury after the interception. At first, I was kind of confused why they benched Jack Cohen, even though it made sense on a standpoint over the last 2 weeks and his performances throwing so many interceptions. Once he came back, he didn't do much for the offense, honestly. He ended up throwing 2 picks to end up losing to the Renegades with a good run game and a good defense. Hopefully Sinnott can come back for San Antonio and try and fix things before next week. Now that we have talked about another great week of football, and now that we're halfway through the season, I'm excited to get into the second half of the season, so let's talk about it with Week 6, starting with the Seattle Sea Dragons traveling over to play the winless Orlando Guardians. With Seattle coming off the biggest win of the season so far against Houston and looking really good on defense doing so, I'm going to take Seattle again against the winless Guardians. Though, if Ben decides to throw 3 picks again, Quentin Dormandy and the offense could capitalize at home. Moving on to St. Louis, as the Battlehawks travel over to Vegas to play the Vipers. For this game, I can definitely see a shootout with these two, with the high-powered offenses from them. The Battlehawks O-line will need to be ready, as they are second in the XFL with sacks allowed, and they'll be playing against Maximilian Roberts, who has 5 sacks this season, and Vic Beasley on the D-line. But with how the Vipers have been playing all year in the secondary, and how the Battlehawks are one of the best offenses in the league, I'm going to take St. Louis. On to the next game, which is basically, it's a rematch with San Antonio and Arlington. They're just flipping sides. So this time, San Antonio is going to be traveling over to Arlington. And with the rematch from last week, depending on if Dormandy plays or not, Arlington could dominate this game against a really struggling Jack Cohn, especially picking him off twice last week. And then to finish week 6, we have the most anticipated game of the season, to be honest, in my opinion, with the XFL South leaders in Houston traveling to the hectic, rowdy town of DC to play the only undefeated left with the Defenders. With all the hype surrounding this one, the game is going to be on Monday Night Football, the first one of the season. Both teams have been sweeping this league basically, except last week when Houston ended up shitting the bed on offense against Seattle. With that and them showing a massive weakness on their offense, I'm going to take DC because they haven't shown any weaknesses whatsoever with their running attack and Abram Smith dominating the ground. Well, that'll be the video this week. Thank you for listening to me recapping possibly the best week of the XFL. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and comment down below who you think will win this week. Thank you again and have a good one.